The Nintendo 64 would be considered a problem system at this point. What I mean by that is it's not an easy system to hook up to modern day televisions. So if you have a flat screen TV that you picked up, well, it probably just has HDMI. In fact, I'd consider you lucky at this point if you have composite or the yellow, red, and white plug on the back. Even at this point, if you have component, you may have even lucked out. Everything's moving to HDMI, so people right now are kind of scrambling to figure out how to get all of their retro systems hooked up through HDMI. Well, Eon, a company, has actually been releasing products like the HDMI adapter for the GameCube, which actually is pretty cool. It works well. And now they're taking a shot at the Nintendo 64 with the Super 64. So this was actually sent over to me from Castlemania Games, which I'll leave a link down below in the description if you wanted to check out their shop, and this product there, as well as a host of other retro stuff. Great place to go and pick up different retro accessories and all kinds of stuff there. But I figured today we'll take a look at this thing and see if it's something you might want to pick up. And I will tell you up front, this is a fairly expensive product at $150. However, based on the comments for the Ultra HDMI that I did, which involved me taking this apart, soldering everything, getting it back together, and some people didn't even want to take it apart or even attempt to solder, I think I kind of understand why they have it priced like this. I think they have the kind of the same mindset as the GameCube HDMI adapter that's also $150, probably because it's either that or component cables for your GameCube, and well, those are generally even more expensive than $150. In this case, that Ultra HDMI that I installed, just the part was $150. If you wanted to get a Nintendo 64 done through service and everything, it could be upwards of $300 to $400. So a plug-and-play device like this might actually be worth the extra money for the convenience. And I think that's kind of where I'm going to end up landing with this. You are paying for convenience. So let's shift over here and we'll go ahead and unbox it. I really like what they've been doing. They did the GameCube set up the same way with their Eon adapter for that, where it came in a little GameCube box. I like that they are sticking with that theme. This is kind of like a little Nintendo 64 box, and I just think it is a great attention to detail. They even put like the little AV and the little port here for the power. Love the packaging for their products so far. Even has a little power and reset there, Super 64, and then Eon, and then of course 4 controller ports and the little red light there, and then looks like their logo for the jewel on the front. This is a pretty straightforward unboxing. Honestly, everything is front and center right there, the Eon adapter. Let me go ahead and take this out, put it over here for just a second. It does come with some very, very brief instructions, okay? Nothing too major. They kind of go over what slick mode is and how you activate it, which is just through a button press on the side. More on that later on when we compare some games. And overall, it's packaged with like this closed cell foam to protect it. Even has a piece of cardboard that actually will pop into the front here to kind of protect it. Overall, good packaging. Not a ton that needs to be said about this. It's a very straightforward plug-and-play device. So let's take a quick look around it. Actually, we have the plug-in here for the back where your AV port is on your Nintendo 64. And then on the back it has HDMI. What I assume is happening here, and it appears to be the case, they are pulling from S-Video on the back because the issue they're going to be running into is that the N64 does not put out anything really great to pull from unless you open your system to modify for RGB, or of course you solder in the Ultra HDMI. Pretty much all they have access to is composite or S-Video, and unfortunately, compared to modern day stuff or the other solutions, it's not going to be the greatest picture, but they appear to be taking S-Video and then converting it through HDMI, and according to them, you would get 480p out of the back here. On the side, here's our little button for slick mode that you can press in real time, and according to them, it will basically straighten out or kind of soften the edges where you have like a stair-step effect, because of course, through things like S-Video, for example, it'll appear a bit sharper and you will get kind of that shimmering or like I said, that stair step effect on the edges of different character models or things like building edges or stairs. And they do have like this little wedge on the back here, and that's just so that when it's sitting in, it won't actually like droop down or anything. It's kind of there just to help kind of secure it. Obviously, setup super easy. It's plug and play, so it should be. It just kind of sits in the back here, plugs in, sits down, HDMI goes here, and that's it, you're good to go. So why don't we actually try this thing out and go check out some games with it.
So the first thing we're gonna do is test with Banjo-Kazooie, one of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64, and right away I kind of lined it up so that you can see a difference between the visuals when it comes to kind of the opening cutscene here. It does have a better color saturation on the Super 64, especially if you're really looking at Gruntilda's face here. You can really see kind of the difference between the colors there between composite and Super 64. Of course, Super 64 appears to be using S-Video, kind of converting it and upscaling it to fit a bit better on your TV, so it does get better colors from that. Visually, it also has a bit more of that stair step on the left, and that is from just having a sharper image that's upscaled. We'll talk a bit more about slick mode later on in the video and kind of how they work around that. And we'll also do a fun little comparison to the Ultra HDMI just so you can kind of see how close it is here. And now we're going to actually shift over really quickly to some audio so you can see how it sounds from the Super 64. That's what this audio clip is from. Now, blown up Banjo, of course, looks like an S-Video signal that's been upscaled, and it still looks blurry because it's a Nintendo 64 game, I will say that, so it's hard with the 64 going out of the back AV port, but they've pretty much made the best of the situation here that they can, so it does look better than composite, but it still is that Nintendo 64 signal. Here's a game that I think badly needs some sort of remaster or work. We, of course, saw a Goldeneye this Goldeneye leak come out where they were working on it for the Xbox 360 at one point, but when you go back and play it, you can really tell that it needs some help. However, it is still a classic and a lot of people will play it, so I figure we'd go ahead and test that here as well. The color palette for Goldeneye, of course, isn't super colorful or anything, and it still looks like kind of a soupy mess at times, especially with things in the distance. However, it does look, again, better on the Super 64, as you would expect. It still just runs like Goldeneye, though, so keep that one in mind. I wanted to do Pod Racer as well because it has a high-res mode, which does push the 64 a bit. As long as you have the expansion pack, you can access a kind of a high-definition mode for it, and I did that, and this is where it starts to really kind of separate the two, the Super 64 from composite. It looks a bit different when you're on a bigger TV, and of course these are kind of shrunken down so they're side by side, but you can notice a difference when you're on the larger TV, specifically from composite to the Super 64. It might have to do with it being a faster moving image on screen, but I think it looks a lot better on the Super 64 when I was playing in person, and this is one of those games, along with, I think, Mario 64 being the other one, that really shows the difference between the two when running it over like a bigger screen. For example, some of these tests I did on a monitor, and some of them I did on a 65-inch screen, and when you really start to blow it up, you can just see a massive difference. The brightness and kind of the saturation, once again, was really shown better on the Super 64. I fired up the opening for a majority 64's mask because I do remember there was a lot of different colors. Obviously, it's a lot of green, but it can really show, again, some of the depth with the Super 64 using S-Video to HDMI as opposed to composite, just from the color, depth, and saturation that you see here as well, from kind of the grass and everything with the Super 64 on the left and the composite on the right. And you can just see a bit more detail on the ground, and then Link is also a bit more colorful. Speaking of colorful games, Paper Mario, a classic. If you've never played Paper Mario on the Nintendo 64, you gotta go do it. Go pick it up. One of my favorite games on the system, of course. And it was kind of this weird one out of nowhere. The commercials were hilarious for it as well because it was kind of these weird ones where Bowser was holding like Peach over like a paper shredder. But this is a very colorful game, and it does really well with S-Video. So I went ahead and just put them side by side. And again, when it's blown up, it definitely looks a lot better on the Super 64 than it does through composite. And it's just a fun game to check out. I'm also going to leave some footage with some sound here soon so you can see how this one does as well. But overall, I think this is another good one that shows the Super 64 a bit ahead of what composite will give you. I really didn't have a great reason to fire up Tony Hawk Pro Skater other than I really like Tony Hawk Pro Skater and kind of just messing around in it. Not for like any high scores or anything. I know something about Tony Hawk back then and even still now where you can kind of jump in for like 2 minutes at a time, do a quick run and mess around in like the warehouse, which is I think one of the most iconic levels in games still now. Like most people know the warehouse from Tony Hawk at this point. It's still really fun. Looks good on the Super 64. Again, not as good as the Ultra HDMI, but we've talked about that and kind of the cost and everything that goes into that. But it worked well. I like kind of using some of these faster moving games to kind of see how it looked, and it did look a bit better. It wasn't as in motion anyway, blurry as what you usually get for composite, so that was good. And I wanted to test the lag since they said 0 lag pretty much. And I didn't really notice anything when it comes to delayed inputs or anything with a fast-moving game like this. All right, Mario 64. This is where I think I can see the biggest difference. If you look from left to right there, you can see how much better the contrast and the colors pop off, where it looks a bit more washed out with composite. But if we move over to it in motion, it's so much easier to tell that the S-Video through the Super 64 just looks so much better than composite. I think I don't know if it's just because this game is just more colorful. There's just a lot more color on screen from some of the other games I was testing, but this one in particular is so easy to tell the differences there between the Super 64 using S-Video and then just the composite. This was a good one to test. I like Super Mario 64. Most people are going to play it, so I think it was worth checking out. Now, we still have this whole business of the slick mode to talk about, which of course is when you press the button on the back, it will smooth out the stair-step effect. I found it easier to kind of show this, I guess, with video recording through text that shows up on screen that kind of has that stair-step effect when you turn it on. It does, at least from what I've seen, smooth it out. It's harder to, like I said, convey through video recording. It's much easier in person to see it. I also found that in the Mario or the castle in the beginning, you can actually look at the floor and kind of smooth that out as well. Another good spot where I could really show it off. Otherwise, though, it's much easier to see and notice in person. I also noticed that Mario's his character model and everything also smooths out fairly well. It's a cool trick either way, and it will help with the larger displays. Now, there is one other question that a lot of people asked, and I saw this, and I like to think think that some of these companies send me these things because they know I'm going to try something really dumb like this. One of the questions was, will it work for things other than, say, the Nintendo 64? Like, I don't know, the Super Nintendo or the GameCube. Well, I tried it on both. The GameCube, actually, it fits into. You can actually just plug it in the back, and it actually works. Now, look, this is S-Video we're talking about here. It's not as good as their other adapter, and I wouldn't buy this one specifically for a GameCube. They don't even advertise it like that, so I wouldn't recommend even doing that. Honestly, I don't know if it hurts the adapter or not or anything. I assume it doesn't, but you never know. But it does work. It pulls S-Video out of the back. It won't activate progressive scan, obviously, which is where their current MK2 shines, and it looks way better. But technically it works, I guess, so if you need to do this in a pinch, you can do it. And then, of course, I did test it on the Super Nintendo. It also works there. One issue with the Super Nintendo, though, it doesn't actually fit. Okay, so it doesn't fit into the back, at least the model that I have, which is the basic model that most people have. You have to do some modifications, we'll say, to the Super Nintendo, something most people won't do, and, well, it does work, and I guess it looks okay. It looks kind of washed out, but again, this is S-Video we're talking about here, and there are several other modifications you could technically do for the Super Nintendo now. In fact, there are even full cables you can buy to get HDMI out of it. But again, it technically works. It's just not recommended. And honestly, most people won't actually have this for their Super Nintendo with the modification that was required. And finally, let's finish up with a comparison with the Ultra HDMI, which would be, I guess, the highest quality you can get currently out of your Nintendo 64 that also requires the most amount of work, but with doing all the internal modifications. You can see the Ultra HDMI pops off the screen a lot better. However, it is bypassing that back port altogether, and it is significantly more expensive if you're not going to do all of the work in the soldering. The Super 64 on the left doesn't look like it has as much pop from the screen when it comes to color and even just the clarity overall, but I have to at least give it credit for where it's getting its signal from. It actually comes closer than I thought it would.
So overall, I do see this as a convenience item. There are other ways you can go about getting a good picture out of the system, bypassing that AV port or running RGB to it. You can do things like we've talked about before with the Ultra HDMI, or you can wire up RGB. With what they have back there now, there's not much else you can do other than what they are doing here. And you know what? I think there are going to be some people that are happy with what they are getting because it does work well when plugging into a newer TV, as opposed to trying to do things like take the composite, run it through an HDMI converter, and then you have boxes and cables. Some people just don't want all of that. I do wish this item was cheaper. And that's kind of a decision they've made to make it $150. If it were cheaper, I think this is a very easy thing to recommend. However, at $150, and I'm sure many other people are gonna have pause telling you that this is a good pickup based on some of the results we've had. However, I know not everyone's gonna open their system and not everyone's gonna wire in HDMI or do RGB. So for those people who really have a good N64 collection, they will get use out of this. I do see a market, and I see some people who are going to be excited to buy this. I can tell you, it works well. It worked fine on my 65-inch TV, worked fine on this monitor. So if you just want something you can play your games through HDMI, it at least does what it's supposed to do. Let me know what you guys think about the Super 64 down below. I'm very curious what you think. Make sure you guys like the video if you enjoyed it. Dislike it if not, and I'll see you guys next time.